Deltarune Chapter 3 is less than a year away, and while the next two chapters might not reveal everything we want to know about the game, I have done extensive research into almost every detail of chapters 1 and 2. I've studied the lore of Undertale for hours, and after all this work, I believe I've solved the insane reveals of the game with only 2 chapters in so far. This video will cover answers for the Dark Worlds, our beloved friend Ralsei, and how Undertale's story is inevitably going to tie into Deltarune's. It just might not be in the way you think. Hell, I've even studied the Legends of Localization book that Toby released years ago to come up with this theory. So while I may not have all the answers, I've hammered away at this game's lore for 2 years, and I might have a concrete answer to some dying questions the fans have. So welcome everyone to my first theory in well over 2 years, the Deltarune Corpse Theory. It's pretty obvious now that Ralsei is somehow tied into Asriel. In case you've been living under a rock, if you look at both Ralsei and Asriel, both are clearly meant to look very similar to each other. The only major difference is that Ralsei looks older than Asriel. It's clearly stated that Asriel is off to college in Deltarune, so Ralsei looking older is done simply to reflect Asriel being in college. Another thing is that Ralsei and Asriel are anagrams of each other, and this isn't a coincidence, because Ralsei was conceptualized first as the name Rals, but the letter I was added onto the end to be an anagram of the word Asriel. Now this is all common knowledge, but I have to state all of this anyway because everyone's next question is obviously going to be, what is their connection other than looking alike and having an anagram of their name? What if I told you it all has to do with Dark Worlds and the concept of determination? If you haven't played Undertale in a while, let me give you a little refresher as to how determination works as well as how monsters function in the game. When a monster dies, they turn to dust. That's a pretty prevalent concept throughout the entire game. According to the books in the library, or library, in Undertale, monster funerals are cool because once a monster turns to dust, their dust is spread across an object that they loved in their life. It's said that the monster's essence gets to live on in that object. This concept gets revisited later with Flowey's backstory. When Asriel died after merging with Kara, his dust was spread across the flowers in Asgore's throne room. This meant that Asriel's essence was now tied to those flowers. Later, Alphys injected determination into one of those plants, granting it the will to live. Because Asriel's dust was present on this flower as well, he was reincarnated within it and began calling himself Flowey. According to Undertale, determination is what causes humans to have their souls persist after death. It's their will to live and their drive to change fate. Humans naturally have very high concentrations of it, but people tend to gloss over the fact that monsters have it too. Well, yes, it's true that if a monster has too high determination, it just wouldn't survive. As evident by Undyne, we can see that if a monster gets too determined enough, its body will begin to melt, which is exactly what we see in the true laboratory. However, this doesn't mean they don't have determination. While yes, Undyne did melt if she got too determined, she was able to drive that determination from herself. Now that you're refreshed on some Undertale lore, let's discuss how that concept all ties into Deltarune. According to the Steam page at Deltarune, Deltarune is meant to be Undertale's parallel story. However, looking at these 2 games from the first glance, they're fundamentally different and seem to be doing 2 different stories entirely. Well, I'm willing to bet that this sentence on the Steam page isn't actually that far from the truth. In Chapter 1 of Deltarune, Dark Worlds were introduced as dimensions formed by dark fountains. This explains how these tiny schoolrooms were able to fit an entire castle, among other things such as a big-ass forest. According to the legend itself, dark fountains are what give the Dark Worlds form. Darkness spring up from the fountains after the worlds are ready to be populated. If you pay attention, not only are these worlds incredibly similar to the Light World, but even their inhabitants look identical to everyday objects. So how does this work? How can an object that wasn't alive all of a sudden gain the will to live? I mean, we've never seen this before, right? Oh, Toby, you're a genius. At the end of Deltarune Chapter 2, we gain some insight about how dark fountains are formed. According to Queen, if someone has enough determination, they can open up a dark fountain and allow a dark world to form. This means that dark fountains are just that, the rawest form of determination possible. Everything and everyone in the dark world now exists purely from the determination coming from the dark fountain. While it's true that monsters have less determination than humans, at the end of the day, they still have naturally producing determination. Darkners don't naturally produce determination. Their determination is being consistently absorbed from the dark fountain that a lightner had to open. This begs the next question. If it's true that darkners are everyday objects gaining the will to live through determination, what the is Ralsei? Well, this is where it all comes full circle. Considering the fact that Deltarune is Undertale's parallel story, let's take a look at Asriel's role in Undertale. He died and got reincarnated as a totally new being before the player fell into the underground. So if we use this plot and apply it to Deltarune, oh my god, it's the same goddamn story. Ralsei is never labeled as a Darkner, and directly he's not labeled as a Lightner either. The only thing that Ralsei is consistently referred to as is a Dark Prince. So either way, it's implied that Ralsei is in this weird middle ground. He's a Darkner, but not a Darkner. And he's a Lightner, but not a Lightner. This is because he's the reincarnation of Asriel's corpse, also known as his dust. At the beginning of the game, Asriel is set up to be in college and then return home from college at the end of the week. Obviously, that statement alone would throw a whole wrench into the theory that Ralsei is just a reanimated Asriel corpse, but this line here could easily be put in to just throw us off. This is just how Toby likes to tell his stories. I mean, just look at the word determination. It wasn't mentioned until the end of chapter 2, and hell, Asriel's name wasn't mentioned in Undertale until damn near the end of the game. If Deltarune's story parallels Undertale's, it would make sense for Asriel to die, his dust to spread across something, and once a dark fountain has opened up, it allowed Ralsei to gain the will to live. And the parallels go even deeper than that. At the end of the Spamton Neo fight in chapter 2, Ralsei tries to make us believe that the entire fight didn't have any meaning to it. This has led fans to believe that Ralsei is secretly evil and he's trying to make us forget important details. But I don't believe that's necessarily the case. If we look at Deltarune's narrative from the perspective that it's Undertale's parallel story, it can tell us a lot about Ralsei other than just him being another reincarnation of Asriel. Let's assess the character of Ralsei. When we first met Ralsei, it was expressed heavily that he didn't have any friends. I mean, in his stat menu, it was quite literally stated that he was named the Lonely Prince. Since Ralsei is bound strictly to dark fountains, he can't leave to go into the light world. He's essentially trapped inside a world where he doesn't have any subjects and nobody to really talk to. By the end of chapter 1, Ralsei joined Chris and Susie to go on this epic adventure, and slowly all three of them became the bestest friends possible. It's really good character development. This story is almost identical to Flowey's story in Undertale. The only difference is the context. When Asriel woke up as Flowey after being injected with determination, he had lost the ability to feel love from anyone. He tried making friends with everyone in the underground, but no matter what he did, he felt lonely. He couldn't feel love anymore. When he finally met up with Toriel, he thought that her, of all people, could make him feel something again. And as we all know, Toriel's love too had failed. It wasn't until the very end of the game, once Flowey absorbed every single soul in the underground, that he finally was able to feel emotion again. This is why he didn't want you to get past him, because once you did, you would, quote, win the game. He wants you to keep playing with him forever, for all eternity, just so he can have someone to play with. Applying this narrative philosophy from Flowey and Undertale to Ralsei and Deltarune, Ralsei would very likely have a similar ideology. He had literally nobody before Chris and Susie showed up. In chapter 2, it was expressed on Ralsei's stat menu that he actually has friends now. And it's true, which is also why at the end of the Spamton Neo fight, he doesn't want you to connect the dots and view it as important. Because if you do, you'll have to stop being friends with him. After all, according to Flowey, once you beat the game, who will you play with anymore? However, there's still a lingering question. If Asriel's dead, how did he die in the first place? He's in college! Well, using the knowledge of how determination works in the Legends of Localization book, we can make some pretty educated guesses. In Deltarune Chapter 2, it was expressed that Darkners can only live in their respective dark worlds. If a Darkner from the unused classroom in Chapter 1 goes to the computer lab dark world, they will turn to stone. However, Darkners don't turn into stone once they arrive in the dark world in the school closet. Ralsei explains that this is because the dark world in the school closet is made out of, quote, pure darkness. However, have you ever wondered what exactly is pure darkness? Well, let's make some educated guesses based on how determination works in this franchise. At the end of the Undertale genocide route, Flowey reveals more of his backstory. In his backstory, he expresses that he discovered he had the ability to save and load files once he brought himself to the edge of death. It wasn't until we fell into the underground that Flowey had lost this ability. According to Flowey, it was because our determination was much higher than his. This also gives us an explanation as to why the humans that fell before us couldn't use the save and load feature. It was because Flowey had higher determination. And to set this all in stone, in the Legends of Localization book, it tells you upfront that only the being with the highest amount of determination has the ability to access the save and load feature. Going back to Deltarune, there's something peculiar going on in the light world. Yeah, there's no goddamn save points. I thought this was an oversight when I played chapter 1 because the last save point is before the king boss, and I wanted to talk to all the NPCs. but I couldn't save because there just wasn't a save point. Luckily, Toby proved us that this wasn't an oversight, but a feature in the game. It's not a bug, it's a feature. In Chapter 2, after you beat the final boss, the game allows you to save again, but only in the Dark World. So why can't we save in the Light World? Well, let's take the word world literally in this context. If the light world and the dark world are two separate worlds, this means that we can save in the dark world because we are the being with the highest amount of determination in that world. I mean, there's dialogue in Chapter 1 stating that you can only see the light, implying that only you can see the save point, which would make sense because Chris is the only human in the dark world, and thus they should have the highest amount of determination. But we can't save in the light world because someone else has higher determination than us. And I'm betting that person is very likely the knight that the game has been hyping up since Chapter 1. Let's go back to Chapter 1's Dark Fountain. According to Ralsei, Chapter 1's fountain in the unused classroom was created extremely recently in comparison to the Dark Fountain in the school closet. Chom even confirms this, as they claim that their land used to be really peaceful until the knight had recently appeared and put the king and his son into power. Either way, it's expressed clearly that the Dark Fountain in the school closet had been there for a while, and the ones popping up are definitely new. After all, the one in the computer lab had appeared overnight, as in Chapter 1, it definitely wasn't there. This can allow us to reach a conclusion about the first Dark Fountain in the school closet. This Dark Fountain is made up of pure darkness because the person who has the highest determination in the light world was the one to open that Dark Fountain. Wherever it was also very likely the one to kill Asriel, as Ralsei seemed to be brought forth from that specific Dark Fountain. The other Dark Fountains aren't made up of pure darkness, because assuming that Chris was the one who opened the recent ones up, they don't have enough determination to open a fountain with pure darkness. Or it could also be very likely that I have this backwards and that Chris was actually the one who opened up the first Dark Fountain and killed Asriel, and the Dark Fountains are a result of the night. What do you take me for? We're only 2 chapters in. Obviously, there's stuff that isn't explained yet, so trying to solve it all is near impossible. Ah!